Hi friends, I'm Nathan from Teach the Table, and this is Antiquity. Set in the Middle Ages, you'll be trying to control areas of the countryside to exploit the natural resources there, as well as creating buildings out there and within your own city walls, and employing workers to take actions for you. To win the game, you need to ultimately build a cathedral and then worship one of these 5 saints here, which each have different winning conditions of the game. At the end of a round, the first person to complete their win condition gets that saint's blessing and wins the game. Players will start with a single city on the map, and you start with a zone of control of 2 hexes away from that city, excluding any water hexes. Also, an empty 7x7 map of the city is on your player board. City buildings will be placed like a puzzle here if you think Tetris, so you try to maximize your space on there. Most of them will need a worker on them to activate the buildings. There's also buildings you can put out in the countryside out here, which lets you expand your zone of control, build new cities, or send workers to harvest the natural resources. However, when you exploit the environment, you'll leave a path of destruction or pollution behind, which makes it more difficult to harvest in the future. Another trick up your sleeve is collecting these exploration markers, which have randomized resources for farming on the back of them. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, there will be a famine that you have to deal with, and potentially graveyards, which will take up spaces within your city. Before the gameplay starts, I need to explain the types of goods. There's a chart on your player board here, which is very handy, because it shows you the types of goods that there are, as well as what countryside building you need to attain those. For example, if you need stone to build something, then you need to build a mine on a mountain. Also, some goods are food and some are luxury goods, which is important when it comes to spending them, and often having diversity in your goods is an added bonus. Antiquity is played in phases, which are clearly spelled out on your player board, but to put it simply, you're going to collect your workers, then everyone will simultaneously and secretly create new city buildings with workers and take actions. Then you determine the player order, build your countryside buildings, store your goods before they spoil, harvest new goods from the countryside, claim an exploration token if you like, deal with the famine, create pollution on the countryside, and finally, you're going to check to see if there's a winner yet. This process repeats until there is a winner. The first phase is simple. Any workers on your city buildings are removed and placed next to your city map. Any workers out in the countryside will remain there until all of their resources have been harvested. So keep that in mind when you want to send them out, because that worker won't immediately be available to you again. The next phase, city building, is the longest phase. All players do this phase simultaneously and in secret. Use player screens if you need to, but usually people are so focused on their own board that that's not an issue. Players will be spending resources to place buildings on their city map, placing workers on buildings to activate them, and maybe gaining a few benefits of the manned buildings. Most buildings can be built only once per player, and eventually, when you have additional cities with additional city maps, you can consider that buildings in one of your cities are shared between all of your cities. Some buildings can be built multiple times, but they're limited, so if they run out, no more can be built. Those buildings are the cart shops, fountains, storage, and then your houses, which are down here on your player board. All buildings cannot be moved once they're placed, so place them on your maps carefully. Houses are where you get your new workers from, as they usually have workers on each tile. I removed them to show you how the cost increases as you buy more. You can buy the first 4 houses for free, and you gain the workers from those immediately. But then it will start costing you food, and then this 2D means 2 different types of food, and so on. If you have a manned faculty of philosophy, you can ignore that D when it comes to building, so it would just be 2 food in that case. If you build a cathedral, you don't need to man it, but you will need to choose a patron saint on this chart immediately. In the corner of your player board, it shows you that they give you an extra power immediately, and then they tell you how you can win the game. If you have a manned faculty of theology, you can destroy a cathedral, removing your patron saint and allowing you to choose a different one if you rebuild a cathedral again later. However, since Santa Maria is the most powerful patron saint in the game, you can't destroy your cathedral if you've already chosen her. Later in the game, if you have to place graves in your city and there are no empty spaces to do so, then you have to place them on top of a square on one of your buildings, which renders it useless, and any men that are on there will leave. After all, who wants to go to work when there's a guy buried next to your cubicle? A manned hospital will let you destroy 5 graves of your choice. A manned market lets you trade. You can trade against the game at a rate of any 2 goods for 1 good of your choice, or you can trade with other players at any ratio you like. If 2 players are trading, only one of them has to have the manned market. A university is built to connect any faculties that you have on your map. as any faculty touching that university is considered the same building, and you only need one man total, not one on each. The fountain is a small building, which will decrease your famine level by 1 when you build it, and each fountain will also block 1 pollution that you need to take during the pollution phase towards the end of the game. All the other buildings here, which I haven't gone over yet, are still built in this phase, but they won't have any effect in this phase, so I'll explain them later when I can show you what they actually do. But keep in mind they are still built in the city building phase. Next is the turn order phase, where you compare how many manned cart shops or explorers each player has. These are the 2 buildings which let you do stuff out on the countryside, so whoever has the fewest of them gets to go first. Adjust your turn order accordingly. If there is a tie, keep the relative turn order that was already previously there. Phase 4 is building out in the countryside, and this happens in turn order. For each countryside building that you want to build, you need a manned cart shop. The building will be placed inside your zone of control, again, which is 2 spaces surrounding your city at the start of the game. If you have a manned stable, that will increase your zone of control to 3 hexes around your city. Water is a hazard that you can't build on or go through, but a manned harbor will let a body of water that's next to your city or next to one of your inns, as well as the coast of that body of water, will all be included in your zone of control. To build an inn out in the countryside, you first need a brewery in your city, I guess because no one will want to stop at an inn if there's no beer there. You remove a man from your manned cart shop, pay the cost to build the inn, and now that will extend your zone of control by 2 spaces surrounding that inn. So you can consider it kind of like it's just an extension of your city. You can also build a new city as long as part of it is within your zone of control, and that will get you a new city map where you can put new city buildings. This also extends your zone of control, but the downside is that now you'll have to take more pollution later in the game since you take pollution for each city that you have. You can also only have a maximum of 4 cities. That's why you only have 4 city tiles. The other countryside buildings relate to gaining resources, and you can probably guess what a woodcutter does. Choose a forest hex that's within your zone of control. Place a grass token on there, as well as a wood token on top, and then you're going to take a man from one of your manned cart shops and put it on like that. Any forest hexes that are touching your woodcutter are also going to get these as well. Your worker will be able to harvest 1 wood each turn, so you'll choose one near him and just leave grass in its wake. Once all the other tokens have been harvested, he will finally harvest the one on the token that he's on, and he'll be returned to your board to be able to use later. Those forest tiles are now just permanently grass. They won't be able to be turned back into forest at all, so it creates a little bit of scarcity on your resources. The fisherman works similarly to the woodcutter, but you place it next to water, and at least half of it has to be within your zone of control to be a legal move. All water hexes that are touching that fisherman token are going to produce goods, but they're all going to produce the same type of goods. So you need to choose now, is it going to do fish, pearls, or dye? First you'll place a pollution marker on those spots, followed by the good that you chose. In this case it's fish. And after all that fish has been harvested off, you leave behind some pollution. So no more goods can be produced there unless the pollution's cleaned up. The mine works the same way in the mountains. So you place a pollution token, and then the resource that you decided upon, and your worker from your cart. And then you're going to do the same thing to any touching hexes. One thing special about the mine is that if you're on a large mountain range that you can't quite reach the entirety of, you're still going to always produce the same type of good that you chose right now. And that even includes if there's a large mountain range that's broken in half by someone's original city. So the same mountain range is going to do the same type of good always. Lastly, we have farms, which work the same way, and they grow things on grass. So they'll get a pollution token there, as well as the good that you're choosing, so grain, olive, sheep, or wine, and then the worker from your cart shop. One thing special about farms, however, is that you need a seed before you can grow anything. So that means that you need to spend a good of the type that you're wanting to grow on that farm. So in this case, I would need to spend this wine in order to grow wine on that space, as well as all the adjacent spaces of grass that are touching it. If you have a manned faculty of biology, that will give you a free seed, so it lets you build a farm for free without having to spend that seed. Buildings can't be built on top of other buildings or on water, but it's okay to build on top of pollution tokens, except for the woodcutter, mine, or farm, since those need to produce goods on those exact spots. If you build over an exploration token like this, just remove the exploration token from the game without looking at it. Having a manned faculty of alchemy lets you clean up pollution. choose a polluted hex, and that hex as well as any adjacent hexes that have pollution tokens are going to lose all their pollution. Ooh, okay, so that's all the countryside building. The last few phases are really quick. The next one is storing goods. If you have a manned storage facility in your city, then you get to store goods equal to the number of squares on there. So you can basically take your goods and put them on there like so. When you build storage, you pay a flat fee and you can build as many of these as you want. It's all considered one building. You can arrange them however you want as long as it ends up in a rectangle when you're done. Since it's all one building, you only need one man in the entire thing for it to be active, and you can store goods. Any goods that you can't store in here during this storing phase will get discarded. So even stone or gold are going to spoil. I guess it just gets stolen by the local bandits if you leave it out. Phase 6 is harvesting, which I've already touched on before. You're going to remove one good that's out here from each worker that is collecting resources. Once he's done with his job and all those resources are gone, he's going to come back to the board. The fisherman token gets removed too when that worker comes home. If you have a manned forced labor building, then you're going to harvest 3 goods from each producer, and you have to discard one of those goods, I guess, to pay your laborers. So this will increase the speed of your workers coming home, and it makes them slightly less efficient since you're not getting all of the goods. Phase 7 is exploring, so if you have a manned explorer, then you can flip over 1 exploration token as long as it's within your zone of control. You simply flip it over, you're going to get 1 good of that type, in this case it'll be sheep, and if you're getting a food, then you also have to increase the famine level by 1. So 3/4 of the time you're going to be increasing the famine level, because the other time it's going to be wine, which is not a food in this game. In Phase 8, each player is going to take a number of graves equal to the current famine level. Each food token that you have will prevent 1 grave, and you don't even have to spend the food to do it. Also, if you have a granary, that would prevent 3 graves from coming onto your board. Like I said earlier, graves are placed in empty spaces in your city, and then on buildings, 1 per square, which renders the building useless. Graves can't be placed on houses, since houses don't have any function. They just take up space in here and give you that worker in the beginning. In the rare event of not being able to place a grave, the player's going to lose and quit the game. At the end of the famine phase, you also raise the famine by 1 additional, so it just keeps getting harder and harder. We're almost to the end, so much like famine, now each player is going to take pollution, and they take 3 tokens for each city that they have, and they have to place these tokens on unoccupied, unpolluted hexes somewhere within their zone of control. So these are going to eventually accumulate and kind of suffocate all the resources around them. Like I mentioned earlier, each fountain will reduce the pollution that you take by 1, and if you have a manned dump, then that's going to decrease the pollution by 4. A manned dump also prevents other players from placing pollution within your zone of control if your zones of control overlap. Each pollution that can't be placed out in the countryside will result in a grave in your city. The last phase is simply checking to see if anyone's won. So if a player's chosen a patron saint from building a cathedral, check to see if they meet the win conditions for that patron saint. If multiple players have won in the same turn, the player with more unpolluted hexes in their zone of control will win the game. And that's Antiquity. According to Board Game Geek, this is the most complex game in my collection. It's really not that complicated, there's just a lot of things going on, but the rules mostly follow logic. I think if you put yourself within the framework of the game, it comes pretty easily. The game can be pretty unforgiving as well, so it might take a few games under your belt before it starts coming a little more naturally. Thanks for watching Teach the Table, and don't forget to have fun.